Canada observed its fourth one, and the truth was often actually nowhere to be found. In fact, myths and fabrications were just more deeply entrenched as Indigenous people were invited and encouraged to share tales of historical abuse while never being challenged on the veracity of their claims. Now, the granddaddy of all those myths is, of course, the false claim of 215 children having died of abuse being buried at the Kamloops residential school. Now, that hoax endures despite years of passing and not a single body's been found, or are there any records of children actually disappearing at the institution. The local Indigenous band, though, was given $8 million to investigate the issue, but they didn't really tell anybody what they did with the funds or release any of the conclusions of their alleged investigation. And they found no bodies. The claims of abuse, though, they're escalating as it appears to be like a race between people to recount a historic horror that outdoes prior ones. I mean, one of the enduring and ludicrous claims is that children in Kamloops School were awakened in the night to go out and bury bodies of murdered children as recently as in the 1960s. Now, if this was true, the RCMP should be exhuming these grave sites and trying to find the perpetrators of these crimes. There's no investigation, of course, because it never happened. That didn't stop the CBC, though. The state broadcaster aired the claim of surreptitiously interred children just the other day without questioning it. The mythology isn't just spread through news broadcasts. A Canadian-produced detective series I was watching had a scene depicting an electric chair sitting in the basement of an abandoned residential school. It was explained that the chair was used routinely by priests and nuns to torture students. The electric chair myth is an unfounded story among many that include the other alleged atrocities like hanging babies from hooks and forcing children to work in crematoriums in the basements of residential schools. The stories sound outlandish because they are. These things never happened, yet we have Canadian productions reinforcing the belief they did. And we have the term genocide. It's been improperly applied in Canada for years. With no actual genocide to be found, activists have broadened the definition of genocide instead, claiming cultural genocide had been committed. It's an abuse of the term, and it's an insult to the races and cultures that experienced real genocide. Canada is an imperfect nation, but it's not a genocidal one. And to state that truth is to invite an onslaught of abuse on social media and bring about the labels, of course, of denier and racist. The NDP is even trying to criminalize disputing allegations of Canadian genocide, and their bill to do it might just pass in the Canadian House of Commons. The cycle of victimhood continues to expand as people self-identify as intergenerational victims of residential schools. I had one young social media influencer. He was applauded on X for his bravery as he announced his grandparents, uncles, and aunts all went to residential schools. Now, while it's not impossible, it's pretty unlikely that his family members were residential school attendees. Only 150,000 children attended those schools over the course of a century. In the last generation, there were very few who actually attended. But if you listen to the claims of some, it appears as if every Indigenous person in Canada over the age of 50 attended a residential school, and nobody ever questions those claims for fear of being labeled intolerant or insensitive. When I questioned the gentleman's assertion, he responded with a tirade of obscenities and blocked me. Typical response to questions rather than presenting evidence. He also identified himself, though, as a residential day school survivor. Well, what was a residential day school? Well, residential day schools were structures built on reserves where children would leave home in the morning, attend classes, then return home. In other words, they were schools. The only difference is the ones in reserves were under federal management. Most of us did indeed survive school, but we don't have to put the label survivor in front of everything we say. Now, with true residential school attendees becoming actually a rare commodity, race hustlers in the legal world turned their attention to regular schools, and it paid off. Children who attended these day schools took part in a massive class action suit, which the government settled rather than fought. 150,000 survivors of these day schools qualify for payouts between $10,000 and $200,000 each. Now, the widespread in compensations based on the alleged suffering due to attending the schools. That's quite an incentive for claimants to make up horrific stories about their time in the school, isn't it? And since nobody dares to question the assertions, the stories get wild and unbelievable. Ironically, there probably would have been a class action suit launched if there weren't day schools either, as children would have lost the opportunity to get an education. The provision of education is entrenched in most treaties, actually, because bands signing on to the treaties demanded it. Yes, Indigenous people actually asked for the schools. The residential school system was not a success. I mean, there's no doubt there was some abuse and that the manner of imposing the system caused terrible social damage. That doesn't mean the system was genocidal, though. And we don't have to accept every specious claim of abuse at face value. Canada's Indigenous people are in dire socioeconomic straits, and something must change. But I mean, things are only going to get worse for them no matter how much money is tossed their way. To start with, we're entrenching a culture of victimhood based on falsehoods, and it's not helping matters. It's causing social division and has led to hundreds of churches being burned or vandalized, and it's costing a fortune. We do need reconciliation, and we need to put the old divisions to rest. But we need the truth first, though. And as long as we continue to let mythology dominate the day, healing and reconciliation are never going to come.